Hi everyone, I'm Zach Weiss, the co-founder of Worn & Wound, and today I'm joined by
Blake Bentner, the managing editor of Worn & Wound.
And there's been some exciting news as of late. IWC has brought out a new INGENIEUR, a watch that some people have been waiting for quite some time. Yep. It's called the Automatic 40. Blake, you are a IWC fan. You're wearing an INGENIEUR yourself. Yep. And you actually had an experience of seeing these watches early on. And well, tell us about them.
That's right. So I was in London last month to go hands-on with these watches. There's three new references in steel, and they come in three different dial colors. You said the Automatic 40. Yeah.
Straightforward name.
It's very straightforward.
No fuss, no muss. It's an INGENIEUR. It's a watch for engineers.
It's a watch for engineers. It's something that we've been asking for a long time, which is a return to the kind of Genta era design cues of the INGENIEUR, which this does in a reference to the original 1832. Of course, the history of the INGENIEUR goes back to the 50s with a much more straightforward case, which had been in the INGENIEUR collection. Perfectly fine, handsome watch, not quite as distinctive though as the Genta design, I would say. So this goes back into, it's a kind of a cushion case. It's much softer. It brings the kind of porthole design that was there, but there's not that much angularity at the edges, like you might associate with watches like the Royal Oak, also from the 70s. The original 1832 came out in 1976, which is the same year that the Nautilus came out, also a famous Genta design, of course. The Royal Oak predates those by a little bit. This one stands apart on its own with a slightly softer design language. Obviously still uses the porthole design, incorporated some interesting textures there, and the INGENIEUR's watch. So this has a soft iron inner core, and
so the original INGENIEURs were sort of from that time when Rolex had the Milgauss and when Omega had the Railmaster. There was a fascination with the practical usages of iron cages and non-magnetic, or I don't know exactly how you say it. They're not amagnetic, but magnetic field protection.
There's some protection there against, which, in fairness, I know now a lot of the movements and a lot of the components that are sensitive to that stuff are now just made with anti-magnetic materials, period. Rendering the iron cage, maybe not as a practical solution anymore. IWC is using their own 32111 caliber in this watch, which is the same movement that you'd find in watches like the Mark 20, for instance. So this does get an iron cage still. So it does still have anti-magnetic properties, which made the original so famous.
So with the new model, the Automatic 40, what design cues were brought forward? What is new? Like, how does it speak to that original collection without just being a reissue?
So it's definitely referencing the original without being a straight up revival, I would say. So this is a design that they have gone back to. This is a reference 3239 from 2013, which gets a much more angular case, but it still incorporates the porthole design. So this goes back to a much softer case. There's a kind of a gentle fall off toward the lug here. Unlike this one, which has kind of a stiff link here that incorporates the bracelet. These are integrated bracelet watches. Of course, this kind of the new one inverses that. So there's an articulating link at the center. So it drapes around the wrist very comfortably. This is still a 40 millimeter watch. It's just a hair over 10 millimeters in thickness, and it's about a 45 millimeter, 45 millimeter, like kind of effective lug to lug, although there's no real traditional lug here.
Wear shorter, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the interesting things about the case here is the shape of kind of how it meets the bracelet on the underside. It kind of makes a kind of a fishtail-esque shape. It's very unusual.
Sort of tapers up?
It tapers up a little, and it kind of meets at the ends there. So a little unusual, like I said, and it causes the ends of the watch to stick up just very slightly, I noticed, but it didn't impact the kind of wearability that I enjoyed about the watch. And a lot of that comes down to the bracelet, which is this H-link bracelet. It's slightly thinner links than the 3239, so it has a very silky nature to it. And I was very impressed with the build quality and finishing of the bracelet itself.
We did have it in the office for, I don't know, a hot second, in which I did get to see these as well. And, speaking of the case profile in particular, I think in photos, it doesn't read as thin as it looked in person, which was something that I found, striking about it. It is a much more like kind of an elegant profile, especially for a very solid, heavy, metal watch that you kind of associate with that classic, rugged, integrated sport watch sort of style. And then actually, an interesting thing I'm noticing now more is that middle link, the negative space of the H, is more emphasized on the new one with a sort of a rounded profile, whereas here you have this sort of faceted profile. It's an interesting choice. It softens it once again.
The whole thing, I think, is a much softer experience than this. Still ostensibly tool watch. It's got even the same kind of Ingenieur bolt logo at the bottom. Yeah. The one flourish, I think, that makes this watch quite distinctive is the dial pattern. This is kind of a gridded texture. It's a deep texture, and it catches light in very interesting ways. So there's a black dial, there's a white dial or silver dial, and then there's an aqua dial, which can really range from really dark, deep blue to very light teal in nature, depending on the angle and the lighting situation that you're in. Now, the pattern that's there is referencing a pattern that was on one of the original references of this. It's just been kind of blown up a bit and accentuated in depth. How do you feel about this pattern?
I like the pattern. I think that just seeing pattern and texture in general on watches, I'm glad it's been embraced in the last few years. And there's a handful of brands that maybe kicked that off, and everyone's taking notice. But it really adds a lot of personality and character to the watch. That there's something very stoic, very mid-century, obviously, about the integrated 70s Genta-esque case design that, I don't know, it's not for everyone. I wouldn't say it's necessarily even for me all the time. But the dial kind of brings out a sort of personality that I think might not have been there otherwise, per se. So it's a smart move.
Yeah, I agree. And it also makes it feel a little bit more contemporary than it would otherwise. So it seems like they're definitely trying to go into their own territory here with this watch, rather than just be straight up bringing back the old one as it was. So there's enough unique elements to this watch. Another small detail that I noticed that I kind of appreciate is the typeface of the date. On the date disc, it has its own, it's like sans serif, century Gothic looking almost appearance. I feel like we usually we take that for granted. Maybe we see the same typeface on the date discs of watches, but this is different enough that you notice that it's a little bit different. But overall, I think the dial German, exactly. And then they are kind of leaning into this kind of certain era of the late 80s of kind of retro futuristic and clean modern design, the Dieter Rams type stuff in how they are thinking about this watch and positioning this watch, which you'll see in a lot of their marketing materials. So agree, it's a different shape and look overall, and it definitely won't be for everybody. I don't know how you feel about this compared to the 50s version, the kind of more traditional round case version, or if you've ever been fond of the Genta version of this watch.
Yeah, to be completely honest, the Ingenieur has just never really been a watch. It's been hugely on my radar. Yeah. It's actually interesting because that it's a Genta watch, and I know it's a Genta watch, and I've learned that at some point, but at a glance, it doesn't have quite as much of the hallmarks of some of the Royal Oak, of the Nautilus, though once you learn it, you're like, oh, of course it is. It's got the ball. It's it feels like they were all trying to get in on this sort of aesthetic at the time. They had to have variations there. This one has perhaps the least distinctive qualities compared to those other two. Circular,
for better or worse, right? It's kind of its own thing.
Well, it can exist and not necessarily just that's a Genta, right? And not that the other two are, but I feel like the Genta aspect of them is one of the first things that kind of comes to mind with those other two watches.
One other interesting thing to note about this porthole bezel design, the original, this was screwed into place, so those holes were always in different directions or in different positions. This is actually being bolted through the case there. So
interesting. So originally the screws were not.
They could have been.
They were aesthetic.
It was a pure aesthetic, and it's the same with this, where it's kind of just an empty void.
Right, almost looks like a tool mark, like you'd
Yeah.
use a case back tool to take the bezel off,
unscrew it, yeah.
which is a kind of an interesting look too.
Yeah.
And here, it is a bolt. Is it is there a head in the bolt? I mean, there.
Yeah, and then underneath it all connects it together. And so, and it is a closed case back, and
It's got a soft iron cage.
naturally. So the other thing to note is with the aqua dial, the center link is polished, and on the silver and black dials, it's all brushed. So, you know,
Polished center links. Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
this might be growing on me a little bit. These
Really?
days. I don't know
Wow.
why.
You're changing.
I can't believe I said that.
Yeah.
But, you know, it is what it is, and then they kind of work when they work. And overall, I think the INGENIEUR looks nice in this form. It's definitely still very much its own thing. It's still kind of unusual. It's got a little bit of funkiness to it. I think they've balanced out the kind of retro heritage components with the kind of modern aspirations of this watch rather well. So overall, I like the watch.
Yeah.
It's quite comfortable on the wrist.
It makes a lot of sense in IWC's overall catalog. You know, I mean, they don't have another integrated bracelet watch, so this is that for them. They are a luxury brand, and you know, and they have their lines. They have their pilot watches, they have their dive watches, they have their dress watches, and now they have this, you know, which I think at this point is sort of a hybrid dress sport kind of thing in today's, you know, culture.
Exactly. I know we're big fans of some of the new watches that we've seen in their more formal collections, which I feel like kind of fly under the radar compared to the bigger releases in the Pilot's range. So it's nice to see them moving away from, not that anything against the Pilot watches, but doing just more things with some of the heritage designs. And, you know, I think they have this kind of cult status of tool watches in the certain eras that, you know, it's nice to see them drawing on for watches like this.
So the IWC INGENIEUR Automatic 40, released 2023. When is it available?
From my understanding, this is available now. So if you have an interest in this watch, be sure to reach out to your local AD or go to the website and put your information in.
Well, awesome. That is the new IWC INGENIEUR. We hope you found this video interesting, informative, or you know, at least enjoyable. Please do like and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate it. And head to wornandwound.com daily for news, reviews, and all other sorts of things about watches.